Alright YouTube, I spoke about MGTOW in the past, but I decided to make a new video on it. MGTOW is bolstered by a small but very vocal group of social justice warriors who don't realize that they are the direct counterpart of third wave feminism.
Okay, so I had a much longer response prepared for Styx, and I decided that even I don't like listening to myself talk for a half an hour, and I've decided to retake most of this.
He points out quite optimistically that MGTOW ultimately weeds out the weaker males from the lineage by preventing them from replicating, preventing them from reproducing.
In an extremely long-term sense, yeah, MGTOW is probably not going to be around forever. For the reason mostly that members of MGTOW don't generally reproduce. They aren't creating more little human beings running around. People tend to come into MGTOW one of two ways. They have observed people that they know and care about who have been run through the ringer, either a really bad breakup or a child custody battle where the legal system has completely destroyed them, or they've personally gone through one of those types of situations. I would say the overwhelming majority of people who fall into the category of men going their own way don't know that that is an initialism that exists. They are concerned with things that make them happy. And at the very core, at the very fundamental nature of MGTOW is about self-actualization. It is a very libertarian philosophy. It's focused completely on the ego and not about external things. It's about doing what makes you feel happy and successful in life, whatever that may be. There are some MGTOW who have families. There are a lot of MGTOW who completely eschew relationships with women. There are varying degrees of MGTOW, and there are varying personalities. You have those who are concerned with the logic of it, like Turd Flinging Monkey and groundwork for the foundational metaphysics of MGTOW, as well as Barbarossa and Stardust. And then you have people who are really not at all cerebral, that are more into sharing stories and anecdotes like Sandman and John and Jerry, the people who dabble more into the anecdotal side of it, like MGTOW is freedom, MGTOW forever. There's, I don't know, 100 little channels out there who have no more than 1,000 subscribers each. The ones who are pursuing the anecdotal stories, who are relating what's happened to them or people they know, or sharing stories from the news or clips from the internet or stuff from Steve Harvey's talk show, where they're showcasing human nature and where they're showcasing the gynocentric nature of civilization. They aren't cerebral. They're not trying to form an argument. They're just showing examples. And a lot of them, you can tell if you watch enough of their content, they're driven by, in some part, what MGTOW call the red pill rage. It's this almost exactly the same as the grief cycle. If you have looked into the 5 stages of grief, the first stage is anger, and a lot of men who fall under the MGTOW umbrella stay in that anger phase for a long time. I know I was angry for many years, and rightfully so. I was legitimately maligned, but a lot of MGTOW don't find their way out of that.
The idea is that women have a higher capability to find a mate in general. They
That's actually true, and it's largely driven by our mating strategy. We are a sexually dimorphic species, and the limiter of reproductive rights or capacities, the one who drives reproduction, is the female. You can send 100,000 men to war, and every single one of them can die, with a third of that back home and a comparable size population of women. You can completely rebuild the population in a generation or two. You can't do the same thing if you send women off to die. That's a lot of what has driven gynocentrism is our reproductive strategy. And it is substantially easier for women to both get into relationships and get sex whenever they want it because there is such strong in-group preference between both genders and specifically women. So women are they preferentially select for other women, and so do men. Men preferentially select for other women. The outgroup preference is almost always for men. That's why I randomly carry around a $20 bill, and if I see a dude with a beat up pair of shoes, I will give him money so he can at least have a hot meal for the day.
But we have to remember that the very ideology is pushed in a manner consistent with propaganda at a somewhat organized level.
MGTOW isn't really a propagandized philosophy. MGTOW is focused primarily on shedding of traditional gender roles and getting out of the gynocentric system, and it's basically a sexual revolution for men, where men are eschewing traditionalism in order to pursue what makes them happy. And the price for that tends to be dating relationships and sex with women, but not exclusively. There are MGTOW who engage in pickup and who regularly have sex. They just don't get into committed long-term relationships. Their relationship with whatever woman they happen to be with is completely and totally sexual, and they reserve the rest of their relationships with their guy friends or whatever makes them happy. That is for them. They use women specifically for slaking that biological thirst to procreate by having sex. That's all that they are interested in with women, is slaking that fundamental biological need.
And so therefore there may be people who themselves, they've simply gone through, they went through a bad breakup or whatever, and they get bitter.
I touched on this earlier. There are really three classifications for how you get into MGTOW. The first and most common is you are personally on the bad end of a bad breakup. Either you had a girlfriend who just absolutely ruined your reputation with everyone, or you were married and you lost the kids in the divorce and the house and everything, and you're basically living in a cardboard box. And if you don't keep up with your child support payments, they take your driver's license, they take your professional certifications, and if you still don't pay your child support, then they're going to throw you in jail, and you're just going to keep going through that revolving door process. Men who have experienced pain, because pain is the single best motivator in life. The second classification or category of men who come into MGTOW are friends and relatives of the first category. Men who have seen their brothers, their friends, their fathers, their uncles get drawn through the ringer and spindled and mutilated by the family court process or by the court of public opinion. And they have come to the rational decision that they don't want that to happen to themselves. So they maintain a great degree of control in how they interact with specifically women. The third category we're seeing in the younger generation, and I'm talking specifically millennials and Generation Z, where you have these kids who are more interested in their hobbies and things that bring them pleasure. It's not that they have actively made the decision that they want nothing to do with women. It's that they have other things that they enjoy more, and they're constantly getting that little kick in their brain from other things than sex.
The same way that third wave feminism operates, by the way, there are women who themselves, they're not, physically unattractive. They're not mentally retarded. There's nothing specifically wrong with them, but they've been indoctrinated into third wave feminism at some academic level.
Here's a point where I have to politely disagree with you because you're wrong. Women who fall into the feminist category are absolutely indoctrinated. You're correct there. They are brought in by the overwhelming amount of feminist dogma and doctrine that is in public opinion, that is in law, that is in the school system, that is in the liberal institutions, the leftist institutions, that has been slowly seeped in there over the past several generations. They are the product of now 4 generations of single mothers raising children. And they have been indoctrinated into this victim culture. By contrast, men who fall into the MGTOW category, and I mentioned this earlier, are either in MGTOW because they have personally experienced pain, someone close to them has experienced pain, or there is something else in their life that brings them more pleasure than the company of women. It's not because of propaganda, because MGTOW is a very small movement. If you're not involved in the YouTube community that surrounds it or very specific forums on Reddit, you probably don't even know what MGTOW is, other than maybe you heard it in passing, or you've heard of the Sexodus or herbivore men. But the general public doesn't know very much about MGTOW. It's a group of men who have come together under a common banner of self-actualization and self-betterment.
Now, MGTOW has lately invented a new term called gynocentrism.
Gynocentrism is not a new term. It's been around for a while. It actually very accurately describes the structure of civilization as we have come to both know and develop it. And it's rooted in our reproductive strategy, because the female is the staple of the species, and the female is required to gestate and produce more offspring. We have not had as long of a period of peace, air quotes here, as we have known in the last 200 years. Before that, we regularly had large-scale conflict, and I mean large-scale relative to whatever population happens to exist. So you would have conflict every 30 or 40 years that would kill off half of the men. And it would be important to save the women, and it was not uncommon for the conquering group to take the women and use them to produce more children. Women became the staple of civilization for that reason.
The concept that the legal system or the reigning society in the Western world somehow is gynocentric. It centers on women and elevates them to a level above men.
The idea of gynocentrism is that civilization focuses on the needs and expectations of women at the expense and detriment of men. And this is demonstrable fact. You can look at the structure of the judicial system. You can look at how men are treated in family courts. You can look at how people react differently to groups in public. There have been a number of showcases of this. You can find them on YouTube, where they'll have a man and a woman who are engaged in an argument, and the man is in the dominant position. The man starts escalating, shouting, and then he starts dragging the woman around, and immediately everybody within about 200 feet leaps to help the woman. You flip the genders on that, and they're cheering for the woman beating the shit out of the man. It's the expectation that where there's smoke, there's fire. Women aren't punished for false rape accusations, really, ever. They face no repercussions for malicious charges, for falsifying police reports when it involves rape charges. And even in the event that the man is completely exonerated and can demonstrate beyond the shadow of a doubt that it was completely contrived for her benefit, she usually doesn't face any repercussions whatsoever, let alone having to pay the court costs. No. And then that rape charge that the man defeats follows him for the rest of his life. Even though he beat it in court, the fact that he was even accused will severely damage his employability forever, because of the damage that women can do to men's reputation just on their word. Yeah, gynocentrism is a thing. Look at the focus in education for the last 40 years. We have been absolutely laser focused on women's educational attainment to the point where we have now our third generation of boys who are drugged and treated like defective girls in the classroom. If they're rambunctious and rowdy, they're given Adderall and and Ritalin to make them behave and sit still. We've gotten rid of recess in most American schools, which I grew up with recess, and it was my favorite part of the day because I got to go outside, run around, swing on the monkey bars, play on the teeter-totters, play kickball or dodgeball. I got to go outside and have fun. I was an academic, but I still liked going outside for recess and having that unstructured playtime. And that is extremely beneficial to boys. Well, we've taken that away. Look at prejudicial hiring practices. There isn't an employer in the country right now that isn't trying to attract more female workers, especially in the STEM fields. There is no amount of incentive that we can throw at women to get them to go into STEM in higher concentrations than men. We've been trying for, 15, 20 years now, and women just don't want to do it in college. They want to do their liberal arts degrees. They want to do their psychology. They want to do early childhood development to the point where these fields are saturated with other women and these degrees are worthless. But employers still focus on getting women into the workforce at the expense of men. There are affirmative action laws on the books benefiting women at the expense of men. There are, 150, 170 laws in North America that specifically benefit women at the expense of men. That is demonstrably gynocentric.
Specifically, it has to do with alimony. Because men tend to choose career fields that earn more than women. This is where you get your mythical wage gap.
Okay, I cut out a lot here where you're talking about judicial overreach, alimony, child support, and how it's just all a symptom of the same problem of judicial overreach. It's really not about the court or the federal government bilking men for money. It's about providing for the women. It's completely emotional and it's bullshit. Alimony and child support do not benefit the children. It is completely about taking care of the woman. Having a penis when you walk into a family court, if you're dealing with child custody, or even if it's just divorce court where you're dealing with separating your assets, having a penis puts you on the back foot. Even if it's a common law marriage where you happen to live in one of those states where if you live with your domestic partner for more than 5 or 6 years, you are considered for all intents and purposes married. Even when you get into those situations, men are on the back foot. It's not judicial overreach. It's public opinion. It's that in-group preference that makes us want to take care of women, and it permeates our culture. And this is one of the things that men who fall under the MGTOW umbrella are rebelling against by focusing on themselves and their own ego and their own personal attainment. They are eschewing all of these traditional gender norms and gender roles, that they're eschewing the responsibility to be the father and the provider that our civilization still tries to put on them, despite the fact that feminism claims that that's a social construct or whatever bullshit they happen to be sporting this week.
MGTOW does the same. They look at females and they extrapolate that the handful of women that are gold diggers or are abusive or are fucked up in some way represent the majority of women.
That's actually not correct. There are a couple of MGTOW who do this. Angry MGTOW is one of them. He is a spastic autistic freak. And I mean, when he gets going, he's full on Asperger's. But for the most part, men who fall in the MGTOW umbrella don't think like that. They don't think that all women are out to get them. They just don't know how many there actually are, because I could spend 2 or 3 hours showing you example after example of situations where the legal system has completely hung men out to dry. There are paralegals that you can talk to who can tell you horror stories of how men were wrongfully raked over the coals because the woman just ran the entire gamut to get not just the family court on them, but civil litigation that ended up getting dropped but didn't affect the family courts because the family court exists to benefit women. It is there to benefit and protect the interests of women, not the children, not the family unit, and certainly not the father. It's all about the woman. And there is no way to know when you're starting a relationship with a woman if she's one of the crazies or one of the sane people. And MGTOW look at the end result of the failed relationship. You have one of several possible endpoints when the relationship fails, and we're approaching something like 80% failure rate in relationships right now, 60 to 70% failure rate in divorce, and divorces are initiated by women in 80% of the cases, and almost every state has no fault divorce now. So either party can just file paperwork to initiate the divorce process, and nobody is assumed at fault. It doesn't end up being a contractual nightmare. It ends up in litigation between the two parties deciding how they're dividing assets, not whether or not they should be getting divorced. Men look at these relationships ending in one of a few different ways. At the best, you part amicably, well, reasonably amicably, with some hurt feelings. That's rare. Most likely what ends up happening is your reputation takes a huge dive because she will pull out everything. She will charge you with domestic violence. She will charge you with rape. She'll charge you with stalking. She'll get a protective order against you. And all she has to do is call up the local sheriff's department and she can get a protective order against you because she feels threatened. And because men are, on average, larger and more physically intimidating than women, they will barely ask any questions and you can be evicted from your place of residence while that's being dealt with. So now you have the additional expense of somewhere else to live while you're in litigation. That's kind of the better case. Heaven help the man who is going through divorce with children because the entire legal system is structured to benefit the mother. If you are a female walking into family court disputing custody, you are in so many ways structurally advantaged over the man. The man has to establish that he's not a pedophile. The woman can charge him with sexual assault for herself or on behalf of the children. The police are required to investigate, and if it ends up being malicious prosecution, she's usually not chased by the state or by the local prosecution. She usually faces no repercussions whatsoever. If the man doesn't fight back, then he has that on his permanent record forever. You can end up in a situation where the man has no legal rights to his children, or he does have legal rights to his children, but then she routinely violates his court-ordered parental time, his access to his children, and at the worst, she'll get a slap on the wrist. If he does that in reverse, he'll get fined, he'll get dragged into court, he'll have to pay her legal fees for dragging him into court. He could end up spending time in jail, he can lose custody, he can lose visitation privileges, but still be required to pay for those children. The men who fall under the MGTOW umbrella look at this fustercluck, this clusterfuck of a nightmare that is relationships with women, and they have decided that it's just not worth all of the pain that they're seeing so many other men going through in dealing with these relationships, and they decide to eschew relationships with women, to eschew sex if they have to, in order to work on other things that make them feel good about themselves. That can be working out, that can be running marathons, that can be devoting themselves to a career, that can be starting a business, whatever makes the dude happy. MGTOW is all about, for lack of a better expression, self-indulgence and taming your own ego. That's about all I have to contribute to this dialogue. I think this video is going to end up being as long as the first cut. We'll see.